Workers, and welcome back to the Third Age Babylon 5 podcast. Usually we are three Europeans who discuss the show. Today it's only Alex and me. So today we only will have the opinion of people who have seen the show lots of times, and someone who has seen it all at least once, or twice in some cases. Today we're going to be discussing the episode GROPOS, which is an episode in which Earth Force is sending troops to Babylon 5. The troops themselves are not fully aware of what this project, this mission is that they are on there. Interesting is also that with these troops we see a commander, colonel, what is this? Lieutenant? General Franklin arrive. All the titles. General Franklin arrive, who is the father of our Dr. Franklin, so we have that going on. In this plot we also have Garibaldi, who has a little fling with someone in these special troops that are on the station, and we also see Delenn meeting more normal Earth citizen face to face, and we have some interesting conflicts there going on. In the end, this all is about a conflict, a foreign conflict. Earth Force is taking a stand, and Earth Force is getting invested in.
Yes, and while Meike isn't with us today, she did give me a handful of little notes on what her thoughts on this episode were. So while we don't have her for this main discussion, her thoughts will definitely be in here still. And if there is anything more specifically to discuss about, maybe even in the comments, then obviously we can talk about this in our next recording when she will be with us again. All right, we don't really have the first viewers' impressions, of course, but we have our own first impressions, and it's been a little while since you saw this last, so what were your thoughts watching GROPOS?
Yeah, my thoughts on this episode. When I watched it for the first time, I still remember that I wasn't really invested, actually. I didn't really get what the point was, what the big reveal of this episode was. I saw it and I noticed that this whole military operation seemed like a bad idea. But I was a bit distanced. I was a bit distanced from the whole drama. This time around it was a lot different. I felt like this time you actually felt how piece by piece the normality that we knew, the status quo that we knew, is falling apart. And you saw how the whole world feels a lot more militarized, a lot more ready for conflict, and see this fully in action. And the last scene where you saw a lot of the side characters that were only introduced for this episode, where you saw them lying dead, that really hit harder this time, definitely.
I mean, this is interesting because the final scene is definitely also what Meike mentioned as her biggest positive in the notes on her own impressions. She wasn't a huge fan of the episode overall, and that kind of reflects the reaction that I see from most people that I see interacting with Babylon 5, especially for the first time. It's not the most beloved episode, but it is a very memorable episode, and I think this is true for me as well. It's definitely one that stands out a lot, and as a little bit of trivia, in looking into all kinds of Babylon 5 merchandise, what I've noticed is that there was actually a Babylon 5 tabletop game specifically based around the GROPOS, the ground troops, with like little miniatures of the tanks and the troopers and stuff, even though they aren't really a huge part of the show overall, but this one episode put such a highlight on them that they tried to adapt this into its own little side project, which wasn't as successful as the Babylon 5 role-playing game or stuff, so there was bigger things, of course, but nevertheless, like the fact that we have this here is somewhat notable and stands out. All right, we have a pretty straightforward main plot here, but we can maybe start talking about the deployment of the ground pounders in general, and then kind of veer into the various ways this touches our station. How about that?
Yes, that sounds like a good idea.
All right, and I mean, we start out with Ivanova for one of the few moments enjoying a perfectly calm night where nothing horrible can happen, and then how many people is it? 25,000, 15,000, something around that gets dropped on her head basically with no notice. And we see, for once, just the scale of Babylon 5, that accommodating this amount of troops is, a challenge, but at the same time, it is perfectly doable. And the first little bit of the episode is spent just with the shock of, oh my God, there is that many people here now. Why are they here? What's the entire idea here? And what does this mean for Babylon 5? And that comes on the heels pretty much immediately on the declaration of war. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit. In this season, we see this war escalating, and literally the next day, Earth Alliance is ready to send out a bunch of troops, right? And one of the reasons given is, well, there is a war in the galaxy now, and very quickly it becomes apparent that Earth Alliance expects this war to spill over. We want to be ready for this. We want to position ourselves strategically. So you get this idea that even though we have had this big paradigm shift in the show now, things are at war now, everything is different, there have been people that have been anticipating and planning for this, because I don't think they drafted this entire plan for this operation and everything out of nothing. I assume there were just contingency plans like this in place, and now that things have escalated, this is happening.
Yes, but I also think that no matter what kind of government you have, in any case, these plans should be somewhere ready. I think you have for any kind of scenario always these plans. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how I want to start. Maybe I want to bring a real life example that I find kind of
sure
fitting only in some way, but fitting in an amusing way probably. Because when the war in Ukraine started, we changed the military budget in Germany in a way that had not happened after World War II. And you have one historian who always has always been interviewed in history documentaries about the past 200 years, commenting on everything. And the change happened in the morning, and in the evening you had this emergency interview with him where you had to explain on what the new spirit of the new time you were living in was. And that I found super wild, how we have to ask a historian of what does this mean? Can you explain this? And then do it in a spontaneous Zoom interview of, can you please make a statement on this? Because people knew his face from documentaries and whatever. And that kind of was what that reminded me of a bit, actually, of this shifting of time.
It makes you wonder, like, how many ISN interviews like this were there, this immediate, guys, it's been 10 years since the Minbari were on our doorstep, but we are going out there again and making our statements and stuff. I think, yeah, this is definitely the case that this change that we saw on Babylon 5 in the last episode is now felt throughout the galaxy, and Earth is getting involved in that. And I think this is where the episode also starts introducing us to the idea of Earth in a big way, because it pulls every opportunity to remind us that the people coming on board this station are people from Earth. They haven't spent a year in space on Babylon 5. They aren't seasoned spaceship captains like Sheridan, so all of this is weird to them. All of this is different to them. They have very much less insight into galactic politics than we do. And we see that in all of the characters that we meet, from the individual grunts right up to the general who arrives on the station.
Although I would not in general say that it's an everyday man perspective from general citizens on Earth, because I think we should still keep in mind that here we see people who are part of the military. And if you join the military or also the police, then no matter what kind of government you have, there always is a kind of selection also in personality and in views, and you have to keep that in mind. So I think that it's people who would join the military that makes them a group of people.
And I mean, I pull out this detail any chance I get, because I find it extremely funny. But depending on what of the rule books and fact books of Babylon 5 you follow, some of them brought out by Moongus Entertainment would even explain to you that it's mostly Germans that you are getting here, because different countries sign up more often for Alliance service than others. So there's definitely also this idea that on Earth, and we've seen this even in the show, in news coverage and such, there are certain countries, especially in the global south, that are much more involved with Earth matters at the moment, because they're still developing themselves to an interstellar status, and other countries, the more industrious ones that maybe have a certain history, that are more prone to being part of Earth for security in the military.
Although I found it interesting that Germany here is still viewed as a relevant military force, because I think in general we have really not invested much in that lately.
It takes a very surface level view, this codex that I'm citing here. So I don't know how happy the writers of Babylon 5 themselves would be about that, but I enjoy the details still, especially because the writers do put an awful lot of German names when it comes to bad guys in this show. So there's definitely something to it.
Just for the viewers, this with the German people in the military is so funny because our military has in the past 10 or 15 years always proven to be extremely bad managed, have a lot of very embarrassing, amusing failures in what is like what weapons were bought and stuff like that. There were a few funny scandals. That's why it's funny.
It's this mixture of German bureaucracy and then any kind of military shenanigans that, to be fair, every other country knows just as much, but it's always a nice highlight for us. But just from the episode itself, we can talk a little bit about what kinds of people and what kind of force are the ground pounders, the GROPOS, because we do get a little bit of insight here. And maybe this is something we should talk about in the beginning here as we get to know these characters. And a few things that we get to know is, for one, it's a fairly diverse group of people. We have 25,000 of them on board, and the little sample that we get is from all kinds of nationalities and backgrounds. We have men, we have women serving at the same time. So especially in the 90s, that is kind of this portrayal of it's a global force that is arriving now. And we also see in the pair that takes up bunks with our favorite pilot, Warren Keffer, we have Large, who is a career soldier who has been doing this for decades at this point. And we have his sidekick who's doing his first tour right now. So we get this idea that these GROPOS are, at least some of them, career soldiers. So it's not just a bunch of conscripts that have received basic training and screening and are sent in the field. No, these are in parts at least seasoned troops, which is interesting as a portrayal. Not every sci-fi show and every sci-fi franchise of this era portrays it in that way. This idea that the soldiers that are being sent to battle are normal people that also have to continue their lives after service, which we've seen in Garibaldi and some of the characters he interacted with, I think is notable, and I think adds a little bit to the discussion in the end that we are definitely going to have. Anything particular about the ground pounders that we meet, maybe apart from the general, who we will have to talk about separately?
Yeah, I mean, for once we meet these. Oh God, now I want to use a German word that no one will understand. We meet these Schläger.
Yeah, jarheads.
Yes, right.
Work with that.
For once we have those, which is like the stereotype you would probably imagine to have in the group somewhere. Because I mean, they are probably useful in many situations where you need these troops and that they are annoying on the station. Sorry, it's just the way it is. But then we also have characters where I at least felt that you see that this is kind of like a way into a career for many people who otherwise don't really know where to go. You can, if you survive all of these missions and you make it through all of these dangerous tasks that you get there, then it is probably a way that leads into a lot of better positions. You have this young person that was there and has only had the training and never seen any action and seemed so clueless about life in general when you talk to him, you know. So that's really how I saw that.
It's either that, or if you go to your classic Full Metal Jacket Vietnam era movie, where it's this idea people go into the military with a very strong idea of what it means to be part of the military, with a very strong idea of what it means to be a patriot, and are, like you say, a little bit clueless about the realities of what that entails. And then when they're confronted with the reality, that's where the big tragedy happens, and this idea of war is brought to bear. And in a lot of works, be that books, be that movies, be that series, that are critical of wars, that's usually the perspective that you say. And when you go into science fiction, it often kind of elevates that even more by saying, oh, people are getting brainwashed, or you're using disposable clone troopers or whatever, to kind of throw that even more. And I think this is the only reason I'm going into this trope so much is I think Babylon 5 does a lot deliberately to move away from that by saying, okay, you have this young person that has just joined up and no idea. But then right next to him, you have the veteran who knows exactly how bad things are, who has lost a dear friend to this, who only tells war stories because these are the only stories he has to tell.
I mean, I was just thinking about our one young guy, definitely. And I think that what we see here is definitely a part of the troops that can be seen as the step into another career, or can be seen as an easy start for people who look for something to do. And I don't mean that loaded that much, definitely. And of course, you also have characters who have been there for longer and have more experience and just have that as their day job. What I meant was that we definitely see this lowest step of military here. Where also a lot of our characters start. I mean, you said that that was for Garibaldi, it was bad. It basically just started as alcohol problem, but also because of all the experience he made in military there. It's the reason why he is now in security on Babylon 5. I think without that job experience, he probably would not have ended up there.
No, I mean, I'm saying that as kind of how Babylon 5 undercuts this idea a little bit. But at the same time, of course, it's true that, I mean, this is a show centered on character serving in the military. It's generally providing this very positive view of it, of course. We can now zoom out a little bit to the larger scale of why are so many people on this station. And we have won this story. This is just a transfer from IO. This is just a milk run. This is very easy, which is more or less the cover-up story, the political story, because officially Earth has not entered the Sh'lassen conflict, which is where they're ultimately going to go. But unofficially, there are talks happening between Earth and an alien government, and Earth will basically start a surprise attack against this particular rebel stronghold. There's an internal conflict somewhere that Earth wants to intervene in. And in return, Earth will get rights to essentially establish a military base in a strategically sound place. And we can talk about that for a moment because, like you said in the beginning, from the beginning you get the sense that this might be a bad idea. And as soon as Sheridan looks at the plans for the fortress they're trying to take, he also reiterates, this is a bad idea. I've been there before. This is a stronghold. If it was easy, the Sh'lassen would be doing that themselves. So clearly this is not going to be as easy as it was made out to be. But at the same time, for all the reservations that we rightly have about Earth Alliance, it's still a perfectly valid plan. And I think this is also important when I look at portrayal of military operations in sci-fi and such. We very rarely get something that is so ambivalent.
Yes, but what makes it valid for you?
I mean, all the reasoning behind it is there is legitimately a war between the Narn and the Centauri happening. So the idea that Earth wants to have an outpost that is in a good position between both of their territories, I don't see anything necessarily wrong with that. That's a legitimate security interest to have, or at least I don't see it as any more positive or negative than any country on Earth right now saying there are valid reasons to want a military presence in other countries around the world. And that's something that, most countries that can afford it do.
Yes, that's true. That's definitely true. That also is an explanation that if you have that explanation, if you are in that room with Sheridan and General Franklin, you understand why they do it and you can accept that. That's true. But I was just thinking what made me skeptical of that whole operation right from the start was that we have this nation that has a civil war going on. And we have never interacted, as Babylon 5, we have never interacted with these people. We don't know why the civil war started. We don't know what kind of government it is. We don't know what the rebels want and what kind of history both have. And our military is suddenly there and intervenes and takes a side. And that's what I find problematic.
Especially you would expect most of the relevant races out there that want to have any kind of place on the galactic stage have ambassadors on Babylon 5. The Sh'lassen Triumvirate does not. There might be reasons for that. But on the other hand, it is kind of this thing where there is an internal conflict going on. There is a government. We don't know how legitimate that is, but looking at it from a neutral perspective, for every time there is a very righteous revolution going on, there's also a very bad military coup going on. So if somebody tells me there's rebels trying to overthrow the government, it's very hard to say whether or not that's a good thing or not.
It is hard to say, but I don't know, after some real-world examples that I don't really want to look into here in detail right now, I would always be skeptical if someone from the outside is suddenly taking sides like that.
Yes.
That is just always something, I don't know, if the government really turned to Earth, only Earth, for help, they would probably then have to be redirected to Babylon 5 to make a case, an official one.
Maybe, but I mean, this is also this continuing quest for Babylon 5 to strive for relevance, right? Because right now it's this thing, the Babylon 5 Council exists because people kind of agreed on that, but there's not really we talked about that before, there's not really a binding legal work around that. So any government might just say, well, Babylon 5 is a great experiment that, by the way, just failed. The war has just broken out despite Babylon 5's efforts. So maybe let's not have that extra step in getting help to our colony. Maybe just talk to Earth Alliance directly. So, and once again, it's this thing where, like you say, from Sheridan's perspective and our perspective, we have very many valid questions about that, but just in universe, it's a perfectly legitimate thing to do. Morally, we can have long discussions, but just from political standpoint, it makes complete sense to me that this is something the government would do, and there's no overt reason to be extremely skeptical about that. Which I like. It's more interesting to me than the usual, oh, there's a deliberately evil empire that we are now rebelling against and fighting for, and this is why war is happening, and that's tragic. Then this is more saying, no, there's a conflict, there's a battle going to happen for reasons that are at least understandable, but at the same time, there's going to be this cost with it. And I think this goes even to this point where we get this hint that, yeah, the Sh'lassen are kind of subversive about how easy they make this operation out to be, because of course they would be. That's just how diplomacy works in these kinds of circles. So it's interesting. The other side of the visit, the other positive that Babylon 5 gets out of that, is that these people, the GROPOS, bring with them a bunch of military equipment, and Babylon 5 gets a big upgrade now. It will now be equipped to take on a single warship. And I bring up this detail not just because I'm very excited about the prospect of future space battles, of course I am, but I think this entire first half of the episode also keeps pointing out that Babylon 5 is not a military installation. It is not designed for that. And I think this sets it apart from a lot of other science fiction shows, even shows that, very overtly talk about we are all about peace and we are all about being diplomatic, usually set on a spaceship that's the equivalent of a big battleship to most other species that it encounters. But here in Babylon 5 we see this massive station is full of civilians and extremely squishy. To do even a minor military intervention like what Earth Force is planning now, this doesn't seem to be like a massive campaign for them. It takes 25,000 people, a huge amount of people that Babylon 5 can barely accommodate. And yeah, with all the best and newest weapons upgrades that Babylon 5 can get, it can take care of maybe one big bad spaceship surviving. And as soon as there's more than one, it's going to be in big trouble anyway. And I like that we just reinforce Babylon 5 is in an era of war now. It's not a war station. The solution to no story will be a big climatic battle around the station, because the station is never going to win that. That's not the strength that it has, and I enjoy that quite a lot. But that's all I had on the prelude. We can start talking about the juicier bits of the story now, so if you have any preference there, take us wherever you want.
Yum. No, then maybe let's start with the encounters Layla has in this episode.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. We talked about the GROPOS a little bit.
Yeah, back to the Schläger what are not happy with Layla and become violent quite quickly, because when I watched it for the first time, that was long ago. Long ago. It was in a completely different political climate and situation and whatever. And I was a bit annoyed, actually. I was annoyed by these people from Earth, sometimes seemingly out of nowhere, showing up and being these stereotypical bigots that just start physical fights with people that are stupid and dumb and just want to hit someone in the face who looks different. And I was like, people are never that dumb and never that simple. And usually when you have such a movement like a worrying movement on Earth or in a society, you have more sophisticated heads behind it, and it doesn't show up like that. And I was so wrong, because it does show up like that. But that is just something that happens, and that's just how the stupid ones of those show their faces. So that was an interesting experience to watch that again. Of course, now I also have knowledge of what is going on in the universe. I know more about what is happening outside of Babylon 5. Together with that and with other things that I've seen over the years, I would say, no, that's like the waves it has. That's what you see. So that's a personal experience, and I don't know if I would call it pleasant, but it's interesting.
That's at least, growth over time, just not in the right direction, but sure. I mean, it's definitely true that it does get a little bit annoying that so often we get people from Earth, and so often they are this, like, mustache-twirling, stereotypical bad guys. But I think the episode does have going for it that it does show us a little bit of a broader spectrum when it comes to that. And not that I particularly want to come to the defense of, I think Kleist is the name, once again, a suspiciously German-sounding name.
Kleist is one of my favorite poets.
Well, that's unfortunate for you. Who's running around beating people up. But, if I wanted to defend them, I would say, well, it's established that all of these troops know they are being sent somewhere scary out in space. So they are restless, their nerves are like on the surface, so anything that gets them going will immediately result in violence, because that's how they know how to solve problems. Which still is an excuse, and I do like that it's very much established this guy is an outlier. He's not representative of the GROPOS as a whole, who are then not representative of Earth as a whole, but they are definitely an element that's there, which sucks for Dylan particularly. Well,
it's not the first time that you have such an interaction with a human.
Yeah.
Sometimes it really felt like, if you don't look at it in detail, but just the gut feeling that you have when you've watched up to this point for the first time, it's like, always when you have someone from Earth, they are fucking racist and punch people. What the hell is that?
That's why you do your cell there, right? As singular reminder. Oh, it's not always that bad, but the bad ones obviously stick out quite a lot. What I find interesting about his interactions are that the points that he is making are actually quite understandable. It's just that he's being an absolute dickhead about it. But I mean, in general, you kind of do understand. Here is this person who, for all we know, might have even served in the military during the Minbari War, and this is a recurring theme in our past discussions. Who gets to start a dialogue? Who gets to stop the circle of violence and say, hey, I'm ready to have a discussion? And we've talked about it before. Dylan took it upon herself to just assume the face of the people she was trying to murder, or at least her people were trying to murder, and then expected everyone to be happy about that. And no, of course, that's not going to be the thing. And of course, running around with that change on the station when there's 25,000 new people on there is probably not a good idea. So it's this thing where, yeah, he's being really bad about it, but at its core, the conflict that he's talking about is real, is there.
Yes, I mean, it's this thing that it can be seen as cultural appropriation in a very, very bad, brutal way. What Dylan is doing, that's definitely a point. On the other hand, I think it's rather difficult because, especially someone like Dylan is in a position to have a special interest in humans and in culture, and can, especially also because of her personal history and of the history they share together, can develop an interest in it and can develop identification points in it. So really just reacting like that to her because of the look that she has changed has two sides, definitely, because I also think that especially someone like Dylan also is in a unique position to do something like that.
Absolutely. And I mean, ultimately, the most I could advocate for the devil here would be to say you can question whose responsibility it is to avoid this kind of conflict. And she is in a position of power in every possible way compared to this random grunt from Earth. So if anyone should understand and take care of this beforehand, it's probably more her than this guy. It doesn't change that this guy is an asshole about it. But taking that into account, I think it reinforces something that we know since season 1. Delenn is as a diplomat on the station, but maybe she isn't the best at being a diplomat and an ambassador. I think she's a hugely capable person and she's a hugely capable leader, but maybe interspecies interactions aren't exactly a strong suit, which makes sense because we know she isn't the trained ambassador that the Minbari would usually send. She is just a member of the Grey Council who single-handedly decided she would like to be here, especially because of a strong connection to Sinclair. So that just is an unfortunate set of circumstances that now comes around to bite. Anything more on the interactions she has?
Yes, I think I would still maybe like to take a look at this asshole person and still like to maybe this leads nowhere, I don't know, but I would like to maybe just reflect or keep in mind where someone like him probably comes from, and because yes, I mean, we as viewers, we have been through a lot together with the cast and together with the station, and for us, Delenn is just this interesting thing. We know that we learned throughout her transformation that she has an own agenda, that she has more in mind than just being an ambassador on the station. And now she has made this historic change that is connected to some kind of prophecy. For us, that is just like a big thing that we know. And now we see a human who is not responding well to it, who, probably, I mean, how many Minbari could he have probably seen so far?
And I mean, the thing is, he comes at her immediately with this assumption, you assumed our face to mock us or to try and take us over. And the thing is, in 9 out of 10 Minbari, he would be probably right about that. Of all the Minbari that we've met, 9 times out of 10, that would be completely right. The last time Earth has seen any news about the Minbari was a rogue cruiser harassing their people and almost provoking another war with the station. Yes. So it's this thing.
Still, I think why this interaction also always seems so rough and to me, it annoyed me so much in the first place was that he was immediately so extremely negative, and that you have this interaction between Delenn and a normal human finally, and the first thing he assumes is this shit, and then starts punching people. I found it annoying actually, but I think it is probably rather realistic actually. At least when you are in the position of Delenn and you walk through that station at that point, it is very likely that will be the outcome. But it is not nuanced at all. You just have this person that just wants to punch someone. That was what I found hard to take the first time I watched it.
And I think that's perfectly justified. And we see in him, obviously, this extremely flawed worldview where he has this worst possible assumption about Minbari. But like you were asking, you can ask, where does he come from, both literally on the world and also in his mindset? And once you start taking this question, the problem is this mindset that he has. When will this ever be challenged? If he stays on Earth and only hears about the Minbari from history and the news, he's gonna get this caricature of the Minbari. Then if he goes out in space, chances are the Minbari he is going to meet are not going to challenge this worldview. They're gonna be happy to throw hands with him because they're probably warrior caste. So you can completely see how this man might have led a completely normal life. He might not even be, ideologically indoctrinated by some kind of fringe group. He might just be an everyday dude. And he can develop this mindset and it will just never be challenged, because to challenge it, you need a place that is as unique as Babylon 5.
Yes, okay, but I think if he's not at least a little bit indoctrinated by any kind of group that's active on Earth right now, he would not be immediately that negative. If he's just some everyday dude that finds that weird and a bit offensive and has all of this only surface negative view from the media and whatever on Minbari, he would probably make a comment about it, tell her that he doesn't like it very much, and not want to be her friend. But I think this violence is another level.
I mean, we say that, but then we have Natov go in a complete frenzy against Deathwalker because her family has thrown blood oath. Okay, we don't have a big cultural history about blood oaths, but I mean, who knows how many family members of this guy died in the Minbari War just 10 years ago? And it's this thing where it's never going to justify what he does. And you're completely right. Something about his mindset must be a trigger for especially the violent part of it. But it's not that hard to come up with these possible triggers because of the history that they have.
Yeah, like I said, it's definitely a realistic thing. It's still always annoying that it explodes immediately.
It is.
Actually.
And I mean, talking about exploding, we see the same thing. I mean, this is just, your regular trope. You have flyboys and ground pounders in the same bar. These people are ready to explode in any direction, even against other humans if they're from a different branch of the military. And I think this is just, part of also the mindset of being in anticipation of a tricky operation that is going to happen, having this sense of foreboding and such that these people are going to start punching anybody. And for some of them, like this dude, anything is going to be a good excuse. And meeting a Minbari like Delenn is definitely high up on that list.
I don't know if I should make that, but wait, I'm just recalling the scene because it has been a few days since we've watched it again. He was bald.
He's very much bald.
He was very much bald. And he comes to Delenn and accuses her of, why do you have hair? Minbari don't have hair. And I was thinking, like, dude, you don't have hair. I don't know if it was supposed to be funny, but for me that was funny because I always find it funny when you have this biggest racist whatever who accuse someone of something super stupid, superficial, and you can and it doesn't make sense if you look at them themselves because, it never makes sense if you take these simple things.
Yeah, and I mean, if you want to take an analytic look at that, it's just, he doesn't come from a place of rationality, right? It is just funny.
Yeah, it was just stupidly funny. But I think for that interaction, that basically were the points. But we definitely, I mean, we could maybe take a moment and because you've put it all in one very long one, you look, and maybe also just take a moment and look at Delenn once more because what was she even doing there? Why was she even just wandering there when she knew that all these troops were there so unprepared for conflict? Because yes, I mean, she, like I said, I definitely see why she has this interest in Earth culture, this identification with it that can come from a point like where Delenn is at the moment. But also, as you said, she's probably still not the person who can open up the dialogue. And walking that provocative into this bar where all of these troops are, I was just really thinking, what was she looking for?
And I think this just shows us that everything we talked about with our bald little human man still applies to Delenn. Just because she's the alien in this equation doesn't mean the same rules don't apply to her. Delenn has, in my opinion, a very warped picture of what humanity is like. And that is mostly informed still by her interactions with first Sinclair in the Zen Garden and now Sheridan, who is doing his very best to accommodate all that. So she's just looking at Babylon 5 and thinking, hey, I can walk around freely here. I'm a high-ranking ambassador, but this is a place that security is pretty much under control. And even when there were, extremist people running around branding a close friend of hers, this hasn't really shaken her belief that humanity fundamentally is very good. Humanity fundamentally has Minbari souls in it, so that has to count for something. So why would I be worried if there's just 25,000 more of them? She's not really connected to the reality of humanity as a whole or to the reality of war. We talked about how the warrior caste is so completely separated, and I think this also means I don't think she has a very strong understanding of all the soldier mindset that we were talking about here. I think she just assumed it's gonna be fine because it has always been fine before.
Yes, and I think that's also something to keep in mind that, it probably was an interesting reality checkup for her, definitely. And, it's definitely probably not the perfect way to communicate with someone you were at war with only 10 years ago.
I think for her, reality check is exactly the right word to say. When she talks about building a bridge by looking more human, that is working under the assumption humans want to talk to you, they just have trouble, identifying with you properly, which, is this basic rule of television. This is why you make aliens look humanoid, because then the audience can better identify with them, which is a fine mindset. And I think she's right for a lot of people. Somebody like Sheridan might have much easier time communicating with her in this way now, because it just feels more familiar. But, as a diplomat, her main job is to talk to the people who don't want to talk to her from the outset. And how do you reach those? And I don't think she's taking the best steps in that direction, which is not to say that she's stupid for doing that or anything. It's just showcasing that she comes at this from a limited perspective, like everybody else as well.
And also that she comes to this position from her point of view that is shaped by the religious caste. Who, with the warrior caste of the Minbari, she has similar problems, because she has this education, this point of view from this ideological point of view, really, and that is a very unique point of view.
Yes, when we talk about her difficulties communicating with humans, that's not exclusive to humans. She has a lot of difficulty communicating with the warrior caste as well, because she imagined, I can just make the body disappear in a religious miracle and that's gonna solve everything, and it very much didn't. In the end, she had to brute force her own authority to make that work, and of course with humans she can't do that. She doesn't have that authority, so it falls apart. So it's all of this is well established for her character as well, which is just nice to see in the second season, that things are starting to click together like that.
Yeah.
We've now talked about the ground pounders in their relationship to the station, to Delenn. The last thing I would like to mention about them is their little subplot with Warren Kefar, our pilot guy. I think this is his most successful episode. I think this is where it's really useful to actually have him as a sort of surrogate for the ground level of Babylon 5, to interact with them, to get a little bit of this non-command staff perspective, which I think is what he was ultimately intended for, just very rarely gets a chance, because that's not usually the kind of story that Babylon 5 tells.
Yes, you're probably right. I didn't have such bright memories of him because, in the later episodes, you don't see him like that anymore. Yeah.
But maybe let's move on to the higher level, to the command staff, and talk about General Franklin a little bit. Old Firestorm, as one of his nicknames to mention in this episode. A veteran of both the Dilgar War and the Minbari War. So he is, I think, the longest serving military member of Earth Force that we've seen so far.
Yes, how old is he?
Old enough to be called Old Firestorm, that's all we know. Old enough to be Franklin's dad. He's around, and everybody already basically knows he's not going to be kept in service for a milk run like this. It's mentioned in this episode that he was supposed to retire and fade away into obscurity, but he decided not to. So, he's a military career man through and through. And we learn a lot about this. And there's two sides to this. Maybe we can mention briefly on the military side of things. He seems, I don't know what your thoughts, but I think he seems like a generally competent and good leader. Like, everybody speaks fondly of him, including the troops that he's commanding. He's aware of the dangers that this operation has. He's still not going to deny his orders and not do this operation, but he's fully aware of the cost that this is going to carry.
Yes, I'm always a bit torn about these military characters, but I think that's just a very personal point of view that I have on that. I'm always skeptical when I have a character like that, who can have all of these dangers in mind and still carry out orders. I don't know. But I think you're probably right. I have difficulty judging these characters.
I don't think that's a particularly unusual point of view. JMS himself mentioned about Stephen's father that this is a spoiler a bit. We usually avoid those. Meike isn't here today, so JMS considers it as canon that General Franklin would have fought on the side of Clark in the upcoming conflict, that he would not join Babylon 5 no matter what reason. He's just that kind of military career man. So
yes,
there are a lot of difficulties associated with that. I think you're not alone in that.
Yes, and especially I think, now for once I'm going to say that probably, or maybe in later seasons more often, but I guess especially from a German point of view, I'm very skeptical about people who under any circumstances follow orders. I think there are maybe one or two moments in life probably only where you just have to take a step back and think, I'm not doing this because I also have a human side. I don't know, I think sometimes, not very often, but sometimes that's necessary, and characters who consistently don't have that level scare me.
I mean, this is something you can talk about when it comes to him, whether or not this level is really missing or if he's just coming to a different conclusion there, which is a difficult thing. Although with General Franklin, I think you could make a good case that, yeah, some of that level is missing because that's also the level that would be necessary to be a family man properly, and that's something that he's struggling with. But maybe let's talk about the Franklins as the family reunion that we get here, because apart from informing a lot of this general, this is the best insight into Dr. Franklin that we get in a long while, I think.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's, but because you just said that this family level, Franklin also doesn't seem to have that level.
Oh, no.
Because he has this problem with his father, and still he never calls his sisters.
Yeah. He spends an entire lifetime worried whether his father is coming home or not. So obviously his first impulse is to leave Earth and go hitchhiking through the galaxy, leaving his entire other family worrying if he's gonna make it or not. So yeah, there's some interesting things here, and I mean, just talking about this reunion in general, I really like that we have two extremely flawed characters here that are wrestling with their feelings, trying to understand how to even be around each other, and that's about as much of a success that you can get. I think the episode also he's under no illusion that, oh, his family history is fixed now and everything is gonna be fine. It's just now he's coming to this one step of understanding. On some level, there's a connection here that I find worthwhile maintaining, but there's so much that we would have to work through to properly interact.
What is that level of understanding?
That they have or that they don't have?
That they have after this. How would you say that?
Well, because they both come to this agreement that they love each other.
Wow.
I mean, you can be very cool and not impressed by that, but for some people that's irrelevant, I guess. No, just this idea that, okay, there is this family bond that is worthwhile, that despite everything, despite a very torn up childhood, this is a connection that you find worthwhile. I mean, for Franklin, I think a very powerful reminder of that is, of course, talking to Ivanova, who has just made that same experience with her father, who was a pacifist. So that's interesting. But just this idea. Oh, there's a little cat. Just this idea that they want to communicate fundamentally, to bring this back to the land discussion. They just have difficulty in properly relating to each other, and overcoming that as a fundamental thing is, I think, the big step forward to say, I don't need to resolve all my moral issues with your lifestyle to express love for you.
Yes. Yeah, it didn't leave such an impact on me, but you're probably right.
I mean, it's like I mentioned, I think it's important to point out then that this in and of itself is just the start for dialogue that you can have. This is not enough to make a relationship work. I think far be it from me to assume that, because then you get into this unsavory territory of expecting unconditional love just because of blood relation, which is not great. But I think we have two characters here that are genuinely very flawed, but also have this very earnest side about them. And especially when it comes to them talking about the things that are similar about them, the things that the general finds value in his son are, for example, this idea that you have an ideal, an oath that you take, and then you just follow through on that no matter what.
But
For him, for the General Franklin, this is his oath to Earth Alliance, so he's going to do that no matter what. And I think for Dr. Franklin, that's very much his version of the Hippocratic Oath that he took. And we've seen in him that following an oath no matter what, following an ideal no matter what, can be very bad. Even if it is an ideal as noble as doing no harm, it can lead to him getting a child killed.
yes, but I don't know. I was just thinking that maybe out of the moments of Franklin that we've seen that gave us so many red flags about him, where he just really overstepped his authority or any kind of personal borders, that might be a reaction to his father. And if his father really was this person who always follows orders, who would fight on the side of Clark now that we were there already, that could be a reaction in contrast to that. Because Franklin definitely breaks rules to get his head through. When he thinks something is right or something is wrong, he will act against any kind of authority. And that's the opposite of what his father is doing.
I think for me, this is a little bit, this feels very much like the result of your stereotypical teenage rebellion, where you have a teenager who does deliberately always the opposite that's going to infuriate their parents the most possible, not realizing that he's exactly like his parents and just not doing that. Because I think, teenage Franklin would have definitely said, my father is the general at home, I'm not going to listen to orders, I'm not going to join the military, I'm going hitchhiking, I'm doing everything my own way. But I think this would also be this short-sighted perspective on General Franklin that, General Franklin is just somebody with no mind of his own who's just following orders and not doing anything else, which I think is how Franklin probably saw his father for a long time. But I think you can also go a step further and think of it more on this level that, no, General Franklin is just somebody who has his own interpretation of his ideals and sticks to those no matter what. And it just happens for him that part of that is obeying the chain of command. Whereas for Dr. Franklin, the ideals are a little bit different, but the way he works around them and with them is exactly the same, exactly as stubborn, exactly as uncompromising, exactly as blind to all the consequences of that. So I think it depends on where you make your start.
You could definitely in each case see it as a coin with two sides.
Yeah.
Because Franklin is definitely reacting to something.
Absolutely. And I would say this is also what allows them to have this very quick flip of their relationship here. This works so well because it's mostly a matter of perspective. The way that these two deal with each other can either deliberately interpret everything as making them completely incompatible, or on the other hand, to recognize, oh no, there's so many similarities here, just in a slightly skewed perspective. There's one small interaction between the two that I just really, really enjoy, and that ties us back to the whole perspective on humanity as a whole, where General Franklin also has a lot of anti-alien bias in him, where he literally says, protect your own kind first, and he doesn't want to drink the alien juice, but when he does, he says, oh man, that's actually quite good. And I think this is very important as the counterpoint to the overtly hostile, grunt that's just punching other people, because it shows us this fundamentally being skeptical of alien things and not familiar with them is very ingrained in every human at this point. And it doesn't always appear as this outwardly violent affair. There's also this much more subtle version of it that isn't necessarily even so consciously malicious towards anything. It's just, I like my orange juice. I don't want to try the alien juice. I want my orange juice.
Yes, but I also don't know if I like that we always meet humans who are this skeptical towards everything new, because I don't know, I've never been skeptical towards exotic fruits. You know what I mean? It's just
yeah, but that's the thing. Like, I don't think General Franklin, the hero of the Dilgar War, is there for you to identify with so much.
Yes, no, but I would like to see more humans who just look at an intergalactic world and are interested and curious and open, and not just always in this mindset. We see a few too many humans outside of our main cast who are just this dumb, skeptical, slightly racist, or even violent racist.
I mean, we see a lot of them, I think, partially because, we have an entire main cast of people that aren't that, so the counterpoint is naturally going to be this. But I think we also see a lot of that because we want to see different facets of that. And yeah, of course, it's easy to call this very dumb and stupid. But on the other hand, like with Kleist, like with our bald Grant, just take a look at the biography of this man. When this man says, "Man, you should be very skeptical of aliens. Most of them are trying to kill you." He's saying that because literally for the last 50 years he has been in a profession where that has been true.
Yes, but still we cannot argue for any Nazi nowadays to have a point. Because that's what can easily happen when you look at these side characters in Babylon 5, and someone who is that skeptical and that intolerant is still wrong and stupid.
I mean, that's where I would disagree. He's wrong, but that doesn't necessarily make him stupid. And I think that's important. At least for me, this distinction is important to make, because if you just reduce them all to idiots, then it becomes very hard to explain them why, like how is anything happening then, right? Like, why are they so dangerous? And I think that's this thing where...
Yeah, no, someone like Franklin's father is not stupid, but the other guy a bit more.
Yeah, definitely. It's just...
What I just meant is that it is so easy to say that humans before they were in touch, or humans that are not yet in touch with the rest of the universe, normal humans who don't space travel in their daily life, are all skeptical and all only want their own shoes and are not open-minded. Because I don't think, that's just not an assumption I have about people in general, that you need to have this super intense journey of one of our main characters had to be open-minded and tolerant.
No, you don't. And I mean, for the 25,000 people that we have on Babylon 5 right now, only few of them are like Kleist, right? Out of all the grunts that we meet, he is one bad apple among all the rest who seem generally very open to the entire experience. Out of all the high-ranking military commanders that we've met, we have Ivanova, we have all the main staff, they are generally very fine with aliens. General Franklin is not. And yeah, it's this constant struggle of, we do have clearly a majority even now on the station of people that are fine with it. Humans of all kinds live on Babylon 5. Veterans of both of these wars live on Babylon 5. Completely fine.
And the point that I just want to make is that if you have someone who still has these tendencies, you can look into their biography and look into their personality, and you can find reasons for that, and you can find probably in many cases a basis for a conversation and a basis to argue. But I don't think, and that can easily happen when you look at how Babylon 5 is written there at this stage of Babylon 5 at least, to find an argumentation of why it is just the most likely and normal way to be towards new experience, other cultures and whatever. I don't like to follow that argumentation, because I still think that it's a flaw and that it's a mistake and that it has its reason, but it's not how it's supposed to be. I found interesting there is maybe, and I'm not so sure, but we see him in the news broadcast in the end, where he's just about to announce that yes, it was a success, but at a very high cost. And just in that moment when he wanted to talk about the very high cost, he was sadly needed elsewhere. And I don't know if that was a coincidence or if that was actually staged from Earth Force for him not to elaborate on that too far.
I mean, I think it's very easy to get into conspiracy theories then, but for me the main thing is he gets called away by a member of his own staff, not by the news crew. And if his own staff didn't want him talking about that, why the hell would they not, tell him this beforehand? General Franklin isn't the free spirit that's gonna go in front of the cameras to reveal something about this offensive, right? If somebody ordered him, hey, don't talk about how costly his war was, he would do it. We just spent so much time talking about
Yes,
him.
but I don't know. I still think there's a point to it, because otherwise the scene just seems so staged and short. I don't know, that for me it really seemed like that, because the interview happened so shortly afterwards. Maybe there was no briefing before or whatever.
I mean, we can maybe leave this as a question for the lurkers, how staged this feels or not. This kind of brings us to the end of General Franklin's arc here, right? Like, he has these fundamentally different views that explain his point of view but don't justify it, and those don't change. This isn't an episode about him coming to see the light of how great aliens are just because he enjoyed the Jews. This is just about him finding a way to communicate with Franklin despite that, and then going on to do his mission, and it goes like anybody expected. Like, this is, I think, in part what makes the ending of this episode so strong, and I think we can start talking about that a little bit, is that in general, and also what this episode wants to be about. Because, of course, the message is fundamentally war is bad, and that's also what Meike's comments go a little bit into. There is something more to it here, especially compared to other science fiction genres of the time that kind of have this message of war is bad. But maybe let's just start with the superficial stuff, the portrayal. I don't think it's a coincidence that when JMS decides to have a military expedition sent somewhere, anywhere in the galaxy to a random alien planet, it's a desert planet where we have Operation Sudden Death happening and a lot of Osprey-looking flyovers over a desert castle that's being besieged because there's rebels in it. I think there's very deliberately this idea of, that's the generic, like, Middle Eastern country overseas that people are being sent to that you're worried about. Yeah, that's a relevant thing for the 90s, and now we sit here 30 years later, and yeah, it's still a relevant theme. It doesn't really improve over time there. So that's depressing. Well, for one, there is this element, if we talk about war being tragic, in a lot of science fiction works, there is, for one, this idea that the soldiers going into it are naive to that thing, and the revelation that war is actually bad just comes on the battlefield. And I enjoy that this show goes out of its way of saying, that's one of our grunts. There's a whole lot of different ones that have a lot of experience that know this. The soldiers aren't just sheep being herded into a meat grinder. There are people still making that choice, and part of finding any kind of solace in that is that there is maybe something meaningful about that as well. Then you have this idea that usually these battles are being fought because there's some evil, malicious entity that needs to be fought. It's very rarely something like here where it's a battle that happens for political reasons that can be completely justified and understandable, but it still leaves you with this bad aftertaste of, wow, that wasn't a heroic last stand against anything or a galactic threat. That was just a civil war on a planet that I haven't heard about before and I probably will never hear about again. So is that really meaningful? Like, sure, the senator can tell me in the grand scheme of things that was necessary for the security of Earth, but was it really?
Yeah, so maybe to jump in there. Yes, I mean, war. I mean, if a war that has a lot of high costs for our main characters, or that has a lot of characters that we got to know die or suffer, is depicted as this big final battle, this big villain that has to be defeated, this thing that it's worth dying for. It can be seen as a kind of death or a kind of cost that is easier to accept and understand. But personally, I always have to say that I find it even more terrible in a way. I don't know, I feel like in a way I can emotionally better deal with the soldier who is just doing the job and is aware of the danger and is aware of the risk. Then I can kind of come to closure with it much easier than really getting emotional into the point of view of this person who makes this sacrifice so ideologically, emotionally loaded. Just I think this step of, we live in a setting, and we have that in Europe everywhere at the moment, where people that we know, people that we like, people that could be us, see a conflict and pick a side with so much passion that they want to die for it, but it's worth it. That I find more hard to swallow than just the trope of a soldier doing his job.
Absolutely, especially because as also in Babylon 5, you get to this point where to create this kind of ideological fervor, you have to do something questionable with them. Like, there is no way to get somebody to want to die for their cause without seriously damaging something about them.
Yes, but also when you just see a war breaking loose, it can damage you in that way.
That's not to say that somebody has to do it deliberately.
Yes, it doesn't have to be propaganda. It can also just be experience. And I think it's always heartbreaking when someone gets to that decision, no matter what. And also I have these friends in Hamburg who were in Germany when the war in Ukraine started, and last year moved back to Kiev. Because they want to go to war and want to fight for Europe. And that's so great, but it's just a decision that's so hard to swallow. It's just this conscious decision I find much, much, much more difficult to handle. So yeah, I mean, what we see here definitely is a not so loaded point of view, because here we definitely see a lot of soldiers on the lowest level just doing their job and being more or less aware of the risk. I mean, we have this, what's her name? Yeah, she definitely knows what she's doing and she knows what is at risk. And we have a few more newer faces who are just getting to understand what is happening and what actually it is what they signed up for. So yeah, I mean, I was watching this episode actually with the last episode still in mind, and with the title of the whole season that told me the coming of shadows. So shadows are growing through the galaxy, and we already talked about it. It is a change of times, actually. It is an era ending, and I think here we just see another phase of this kind of shadow that is supposed to grow through the galaxy, because we see these kind of militarized forces growing through the galaxy. So this for me, I think at this point when you watch it for the first time, you of course have no idea what is going on really, and you cannot put it all together. But it shows definitely that another facet of a big change that is happening throughout the galaxy. And if you've watched with a lot of attention for detail so far, I think this could freak you out at this point. You could really worry about what is coming next. And I think that as a character in universe right now, I would be very worried. I would not be worried in a way of, oh my God, now this war spreads, or now that explodes, but I would be worrying about, where the hell is this going?
Yeah, because it doesn't really have a natural endpoint to this with a universe this open. On the other side, I think it does ground the entire setting a lot, giving us this one insight into what does war actually look like. And I think the episode has to walk a little bit of a fine line here, because having this long pan shot over the bloody bodies, it's a little bit cheesy. But on the other hand, and why it works for me, is it really highlights being at war in Babylon 5 means you're sitting in a trench with a gun, like it has for the past 100 years and will for the next 100 years. And I think this is, especially in recent years of real life, something Babylon 5 once again feels very poignant, because, we've spent a lot of time, I feel like, especially like with the end of the Cold War and the onset of the early 2000s, in this sense of new technologies will revolutionize war. We have satellites now that are fighting each other, and we have drones now, and satellite imagery, and thermal vision, and all these cool gadgets. And what we've seen as these conflicts have become more and more also televised, all these gadgets are there. People are still sitting in trenches. Dirt is still the best defense that you have. You don't get to the point where it is just, pushing buttons and things that are fully automated fighting each other at long distances. It's just more gadgets for people doing the fighting. And this idea that this doesn't change in the Babylon 5 universe is important, because so often, even to this point in the Centaurian-Narn war, when we're talking about, there's a war happening and battles, we see cool spaceships firing lasers at each other, and that's all really sci-fi-ish and removed from any kind of actual human losses. And now it's just a reminder of, no, that's still happening, like on the colonies that the Centauri have taken over. I don't think the Narn population is just hunkering down and not doing anything. People are fighting, people are dying, and it's ugly, it's dirty, it's all of the things that you associate with World War I imagery more than anything.
Yes. And I think it also is a statement on a war in general, because this also is a universe that has already survived a Third World War.
Yes.
And I think it also is just a reminder of we are technologically at that level where it could just be pushing buttons, but then it could also be just the end of civilization very fast. So wars that are possible to execute and possible to win are these dirty wars still.
Yeah, and that's ultimately what this episode leaves us on, and I definitely think that's one of the titling shadows that has fallen over the galaxy, this realization. You mentioned Dodger. There is this one subplot that we completely didn't talk about. Garibaldi's attempt at a little romance story. We didn't talk about that much. I don't think from my end there is a lot to talk about here. I think when it comes to conflict, his episode dealing with PTSD-ridden veteran of the Minbar War was far more insightful when it comes to that. I do appreciate that Garibaldi's plot gives us kind of the touching base with his alcoholism. He's still just ordering water. It tells us that he is not ready to move on from lease on Mars, which is, fine for him. But all of these things are kind of what we knew already. Or is there anything that jumps out at you from this perspective?
No, I think that is all not new. Although I really liked how that scene was written. I really appreciated how he was starting this whole monologue about his emotions and about how not ready he was and just totally not getting the level in which she wanted him. That was very well executed, I think. And yes, I think also Meike is not here right now, but Meike always was skeptical towards how Garibaldi was characterized, of how much his struggles would be aligning through all of his episodes. And I think it was nice to see that this was still a thing, that it's still active and going on behind the scenes. Yes, so I definitely liked that. That was a big plus for the episode.
We don't see Garibaldi in a informal setting very often, and I think this is a reminder why, because if he allows himself to be informal, these are his struggles. This is what he's dealing with for the most part. So he doesn't make much progress on that because he doesn't really have time to work on that. But I should mention, you talk about the monologue. I like Dodger as a character. I think she's very memorable, like the rest of this episode, and I think her interaction with Garibaldi feel very fitting, very good. It's just there's very little for her to do that is ultimately of consequence.
Yes, also because, I don't know, I felt like she was definitely the whole time written that he knew that she was going to die throughout the episode.
None of these felt like they have a lot of half-life in them, no?
Yeah.
All right, then.
Yeah, I think we have it. In the main discussion, we have that, definitely. There's not much more to add. So, tapestry time.
I would say, just in case Meike has one or two things that she wants to talk about, let's leave the tapestry and the comment box for next time, because we also don't have that many comments yet to talk about, and we are already pretty good on time here. So where can people find us until we finish up? Thoughts?
People can find us on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, where we have our own discussion group, as well as on Mastodon, although I don't post much. I will change that soon. We are Third Age Podcast everywhere. Also, you can listen to us anywhere where you can find podcasts, but of course here on YouTube we're the cutest, because here you can see us.